Michael Goldberg was heading out of the synagogue one day, and as always, Rabbi Mendel was standing at the door. He was shaking hands as the congregation departed. The rabbi grabbed Michael by the hand, he pulled him aside, and he whispered these words to him: "Michael, it's time for you to join the army of God's faithful and be a part of our weekly Shabbat community." Michael replied, "I'm already fighting for God, Rabbi." And the rabbi questioned, "Then how come I don't see you except for on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur?" Michael whispered back, "I'm in the Secret Service." At the core of this joke is an issue which continually challenges our congregation and many other liberal congregations around the world, which is, why is it that so many congregants don't engage extensively in synagogue life throughout the year? What keeps us from walking in the door more frequently? And conversely, what would need to change for us to want to come in more often? And finally, what can we do to increase the likelihood that we would feel God's presence when we are present here? Today I want to talk about some of these factors and propose some suggestions for how we can try to address them more productively going forward. There are any number of real or perceived barriers to entry to more regular participation in our Shul's weekly life. Some examples of these barriers include many drains on our time and packed schedules, feeling like we don't know enough Jewishly to be comfortable in a prayer service, a study session, or an adult education class, feeling that going to synagogue over the years has been more of an obligation born out of a sense of guilt from a parent, a grandparent, a Rabbi Mendel, or another influential person in their life, rather than out of a sense of truly personally wanting to be there. Feeling lonely or marginalized, feeling unwelcome or like a stranger who does not fit in. Feeling that our services lack meaning for us and or the ability to move us intellectually and emotionally. Struggling with our relationship with God and religion, and possibly angry with God, questioning God's existence and or doubting that God can be found or experienced here. Ladies and gentlemen, how many of us can identify with any one or more of these or other obstacles in our own lives? See hands coming up, right? It would seem the deck is stacked against us when it comes to our wanting to walk in the door, or for our community to draw people in to our shared Jewish experience. So how do we respond to these long odds? For today, let's look at this question through the example of the synagogue prayer experience and try to reorient ourselves and reframe it in some different ways with the help of insights from two rabbis who are doing amazing things in their communities. First, my Shalom Hartman Institute Rabbinic Fellowship classmate David Ingber, the rabbi, the founder, and spiritual leader of Romemu, which is a vibrant Jewish renewal congregation in New York City. So Rabbi Ingber described tefillah, prayer, as a state change, what the Talmud refers to as avodah shebalev, the prayer, the service of the heart, suggesting that we should be more concerned about bringing tissues into a service than a siddur. Tissues to catch our tears of sadness or even our tears of joy. Instead of thinking about being, in the traditional rabbinic sense, yotze, meaning one who exits, but it means one who's fulfilled an obligation that's incumbent upon us. Instead of thinking about being yotze while we pray, meaning in our context, I can put a check mark in the box saying I prayed today, we should focus instead on how we can be nichnas, which is the opposite of yotze, which is one who enters into the prayer experience. Essentially, we would commit 100% emotionally from the minute we walk in to the time we leave, immersing ourselves sincerely in the moment rather than simply looking to pass the time until we are literally yotze, we are literally walking out the door having completed our obligatory stay in the service. Rabbi Ingber also cited his teacher, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, of blessed memory, who was the spiritual leader of the Jewish Renewal Movement, in referring to the Siddur as a menu or a recipe book, not the meal itself. The tefillot, the prayers, come freeze-dried, and they need to be defrosted and warmed up, and as we explore them, by adding our own thoughts and feelings and emotions and personally connecting with them, and adding that to the mix. Rabbi Ingber advocates taking the approach of looking at prayer more meaningfully from the outset, creating a feeling of voluntary prayer rather than obligatory prayer, bridging the distance between us and God by allowing us to pour out our souls in sadness or joy without reservation, and hoping to be changed in at least some small way between the time we walk in the door and the time we walk out. Rabbi Sharon Brous, the founder and spiritual leader of Ikar in Los Angeles, offers us a different kind of insight specific to praying together in a community. Rabbi Brous focuses a lot on the idea that what's going on in our makom tefillah, what's going on in our space of prayer, is not just about talking to God, but about being there for other people. Even people who are struggling with God in their own lives can experience holiness by virtue of connecting with other people. We start that process with simply being present, being wholly focused in the moment for ourselves and for others. Now, Rabbi Brous tells the story of a couple who got engaged during the singing of Lecha Dodi one Friday night. For those who may not be as familiar with Lecha Dodi, it's a prayer that describes Shabbat as a bride, as our beautiful bride, the bride of Israel. And so because of that marriage imagery, it assumes a much more powerful meaning for those who sing it while a couple is in the midst of celebrating their own engagement announcement. When we find ways to link literal or metaphorical readings of our prayers to events or emotions in our own lives, it helps us get a lot more out of singing or reading these prayers, whether it's in Hebrew or in English. And interestingly, when Rabbi Brous was preparing to announce this couple's engagement, she noticed in the back of the room that there was an individual standing there who she happened to know was suffering and burdened with his own impending painful divorce. So she thought about it, and she weighed whether to announce the engagement and celebrate the couple and risk causing the man pain, or whether to ignore the couple to be sensitive to this man's situation. Rabbi Brous went ahead and she announced the engagement, and she was surprised to see that the man in the back ended up being one of the very first people to hold the talit over the couple's head while they were dancing. She approached him afterwards, and she told him how moved she was by what he did, given his circumstances. To which he said, "How can I not be there to celebrate with them? They are blessed to have what we all want, so I'm happy for them." A prayerful community provides us with the opportunity to celebrate with someone else even when we are sad, or cry with someone else when things are going well in our own life. And along these same lines, Rabbi Brous taught a Mishnah, a rabbinic teaching from 2,000 years ago that strikes me as remarkable for its time. In the Mishnah tractate Midot, chapter 2, Mishnah 2, we are taught that when people came into the courtyard of the Beit HaMikdash, the courtyard of the ancient temple in Jerusalem, typically everyone would come in through the same door. They would circle around the courtyard from right to left, and then they would exit the courtyard. However, when people came into the temple courtyard who had recently experienced something traumatic, such as in the case of a death in their family, a loss, right? So a mourner, they would enter and they would circle around from the left to the right, so they would be going the opposite direction of the normal procession. And according to that teaching in the Mishnah, if you encountered someone passing you from the left, you were supposed to ask him, Malach makif lismol. What's your story? Why are you coming? Why are you walking from left to right? And if the answer given, for example, was, I'm a mourner, I've just lost a loved one, then the other person was instructed to comfort him and respond, the one who dwells in this house, meaning God, may comfort you. To me, this is an absolutely amazing text and one that speaks volumes to us even today. Here, our ancestors were visiting the ancient temple, the magnificent temple in Jerusalem. They were no doubt awed by its grandeur and thinking about encountering God's symbolic presence, God's powerful presence, God's transcendent presence, the great and powerful, mighty God symbolically housed in the temple in this impressive physical structure. And yet, we find that our rabbis tell us that even in that context, in effect, that God is present in the house for each of us as individuals only after we as human beings learn how to be there for each other. Imagine that 1 week we could have been walking from right to left. We could have been the one asking Malach, what's going on with you? What's happening in your life? And the next week we could have been coming from left to right and would have been the one being asked, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? We learned 2,000 years ago that it's okay to say, I'm not okay, and have someone affirm that and respond, Amen, to you. Responding, Amen, not just to a prayer to God, but to a person and what they're going through. And we also learn that we can even experience God's presence by virtue of bridging the distance between us and other human beings. In his book, The Art of Public Prayer, Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman echoes this same sentiment about 21st century synagogue and church worship. We have a notion that, says Hoffman, if God is experienced anywhere, it is in caring, loving communities. So worship should strive to replicate patterns of loving care. It should break down the formal distinctions of social distance that divide people from each other. Openness and trust, as well as human bonding across class, race, age, and gender, rank high on the list of signs of spiritual being. Hoffman comments that while sometimes we do still have a sense of God's presence in the magisterial grandeur of a cathedral, it is in the intimacy of a caring community that God will most likely be located. So where do all these teachings leave us? What can we do as individuals, as families, and as a community to simultaneously push obstacles aside and increase the likelihood that we would find many of us here together on a Shabbat or Sukkot, Simchat Torah, Pesach, Shavuot, for weekday mornings or evening minyanim? Here are a couple of thoughts. First of all, as a synagogue, we will continue to innovate and find ways to make our prayer services more understandable, accessible, engaging, and moving for all, regardless of Jewish background, both in our main Shabbat and Holy Day services and through alternative prayer experiences, such as what Rabbi Wallach and Avi Mitzner offered on the second day of Rosh Hashanah up at Beit Aryeh, the Renew service, such as Chazan Drebker's special Friday night thematic Shabbatot, and the drum circle style prayer rhythms, which I'll be leading together with Len Barnett from Percussion Things. But second, I'd like to ask us to think about what Rabbis Ingber and Brous and Hoffman had to say about the powerful connection between committing voluntarily and fully when we walk into a service, committing to being there emotionally, and committing to being there for each other. Today on Yom Kippur, this room is filled with people. We're all dressed formally, we're participating in a very frontal service, and it's hard to create a sense of intimacy in this moment. But right now, what I want to say to each of you as individuals in this room is that the real work in the trenches of building an intimate, prayerful community and becoming a part of that community takes place not today, but on the other 51 Shabbatot of the year, on the festivals, and every day we gather in Fonberg Chapel for Minyanim. Can we find a way to be more present for each other? Can we train ourselves to approach and ask, Malach, what's going on? How are you doing? Not only to our friends who we see regularly, but to people we don't know well, or people perhaps we've never even met before, yet have chosen to pray with us in the same community. How many people come in and out of a weekday minyan or even a Shabbat service without exchanging a word of greeting with anyone else in the room? And perhaps walking by someone they don't know without greeting them, without extending a hand or introducing themselves, and kindly asking, Malach, what brings you here today? And all the more so, by the way, at a weekday minyan when we have a much smaller crowd and regularly have people who have just suffered a loss and are there saying Kaddish. Sadly, this happens far too often. How many people look up, offer a smile and a handshake or a yasher koach, a job well done, to someone who's just completed an honor on the bima when they walk past? Not enough. How many of us invite newcomers to sit with us at our Shabbat table during Kiddush? Again, probably not enough. But we can change these habits. And we can start with an experiment tonight during our Ne'ilah service. It's our custom during Ne'ilah here at Sheriff for individuals, couples, and families who wish to come before the open ark and spend a few moments in private prayer and reflection. This year, however, we're going to do something a little bit different. So if you're interested in coming up and spending some time praying before the ark tonight at Ne'ilah, we're going to invite people to approach the ark and line up in not one, but two directions. If you feel like things are going smoothly for you and your loved ones, and the reason that you're coming up to the ark is to reflect on this and give thanks to God, so we're going to ask tonight you come line up on the right side of the bima and as the approach to the ark. And if you're approaching God with more of a heavy heart or from a place of struggle or pain, we're going to ask you to please line up here on this left side facing the ark. And then we'll alternate having people come up from either side of the ark, from either line when the time is right. And as you conclude your personal or your family reflections in front of the ark, what we're going to ask you to do is please walk off the bima in the opposite direction than the one from which you came. And when you walk back to your seat, then we're going to be asking you, in effect, to walk past people in the line opposite the one you stood in and acknowledge the presence of others in your community who are experiencing something different than you might be in your life right now. Feel free to exchange New Year's greetings with people in that line, and as you make your way back to your seat, to ask one or more people in that line, Malach, what brings you to this line, if you're open to doing so. We won't always have this luxury of reenacting in shul this ritual of people walking past us in opposite directions, telling us they could benefit from some support and a welcome. But on this Yom Kippur day, where we recall other powerful ceremonies from the ancient temple, why not take a few moments and see what this might have felt like to our ancestors? Just remember that there have been weeks and perhaps months and years in our own lives when we were the ones walking in from the left in need of support from community and God. If we found that support, that is wonderful and fantastic. And if for some reason we didn't, all the more so, wouldn't we want to make sure that someone else in need would be able to get that support? When we are here in shul, and I mean really here in the sense of nichnas, of entering into the moment articulated by Rabbi Ingber, sharing a sense of intimacy with each other in the wondrous and emotional process of creating community and raising our voices together in prayer, I want to tell you folks, God is here with us, and God is happy. My friends, we don't need to be in the Secret Service. Let's begin to break down these barriers to entering community and resolve together to invest more time and effort to be here, to take care of our own spiritual and emotional needs, and to be here for others and with God as well. Gmar Chatima Tova, may we and our families be inscribed and sealed for a good year, a year that will hopefully be filled with more circling from right to left than left to right, and a year where we get to know each other and God that much better. Shabbat Shalom.